Growing outside my childhood home in Ohio was a giant pear tree that was perfect for climbing. The tree limbs were evenly spaced at just the right locations, and they were the right size so I could grab hold of them with my tiny teenaged hands and pull myself up into the tree. Typically after school, I would get off the bus, drop my backpack at the base of the tree, and with an easy hop, I would grab hold of one of the lowest branches and begin my ascent toward the heavens. I usually could get just above the roof of our 2-story home before the branches became too thin or flexible to support my weight. Though there was one time, I remember, I took a risk to see if I could actually get up onto one of those branches really high above the house. The question as I sweated, was it strong enough to support my weight? As I eased myself onto the branch and letting go of the main trunk, it seemed to hold firm, but then with a crack, the branch gave way. Thankfully, I was only maybe a little fall from the branch just beneath me, and so I landed on it with my chest, grabbed a hold of it with all of my might so that I wouldn't fall 2.5 stories back down, and just hung on to that branch with all my might. It was a spooky moment as I recovered myself and began to climb down, and when I got to the ground, I'd already begun to have large bruises and scratches all over my upper torso. But the blessing is I at least didn't fall 2.5 stories back to the earth. And you would have thought maybe that would have stopped me from being so daring. But nope. Very next day, off the bus, dropped the backpack, and up the tree I went. There were times, though, that I stayed a bit closer to the ground when I began to take those bigger risks. Like when I decided to see how far out on a limb I could go before the limb actually started to give way. Of course, when I did that, I found myself in quite a pickle. I had not accounted for the fact that I couldn't crawl back to the trunk of the tree because all of those other branches and sprouts that were coming out, and I got stuck. I was essentially stuck out on a limb. And thankfully, my father just happened to be walking by the tree, recognized my predicament, and encouraged me to let go and fall into his arms. And he assured me, I'll catch you, just let go. And I admit, falling from the tree was kind of fun, scary, exhilarating. If you recall your own experiences of climbing a tree, you might recall that exhilaration and excitement that you experienced. However, you probably also recall that at some point in your life you stopped seeking that type of thrill. It's probable that you stopped seeking that type of thrill because as you grew older and perhaps wiser, you realized that climbing trees wasn't worth the risk. Yet essentially or recently, I received a pamphlet in the mail that claimed there was an opportunity to reclaim the thrill of climbing trees. The pamphlet came from a tree climbing company in Frankenmuth, advertising an opportunity for folks of all ages to climb trees, safely harnessed, mind you, high into the tree canopy. They even have a rope bridge course so you can walk from one tree to the other, just in case you really want that thrill of being out in the middle of nowhere. The company advertises that it's fun for the whole family, and they are ready to host birthday parties, anniversaries, and even family reunions. So just think, next time you get with your cousins or your siblings and older family members, you can invite them to meet you in Frankenmuth and go out on a limb with you. Though it is important to note on the brochure I received and posted on their website, the owners of the tree climbing business state you must sign a waiver acknowledging that trees are unpredictable and as living things are constantly changing. So, quote, it can be fun, but it can be dangerous as well. Looking to our New Testament reading, there's a mixture of danger and excitement in this famous tree climbing story as well. Luke informs us that Zacchaeus was a chief tax collector in Jericho. His job was to collect tolls, taxes, and tariffs in his district on Rome's behalf. This, of course, would have angered his neighbors because he was paying money to the Roman oppressors. But what really crossed the line and created enemies among his neighbors is that as a tax collector, there was no oversight or restrictions created by Rome regarding how much the tax collectors could collect. Rome only cared that they got paid an appropriate share of what was collected. And after the tax collectors paid Rome, the collectors like Zacchaeus got to keep any amount they overcharged. When someone refused to pay or couldn't afford to pay, Zacchaeus had his neighbors jailed until they could work off the amount they owed, or they purchased their freedom by transferring their property to Zacchaeus. So Zacchaeus, even though there's that quaint little song, Zacchaeus was a wee little man was he, quaint song, but everybody hated that guy. And even the friends he had probably only befriended him in hopes that he would offer them a tax break or be hesitant to have them jailed if they failed to pay their financial obligation. Therefore, it's possible that friendless, when Zacchaeus heard that Jesus was a friend of tax collectors, perhaps he wanted to see who this man was and find out what he really was like. Even though the statement that claimed Jesus was a friend to sinners and tax collectors was supposed to besmirch Jesus so that he would lose support from the general population, but for Zacchaeus, that statement was music to his ears, and it offered him a glimpse of hope that he might actually find a friend who genuinely liked him. Desperate for a friend, Zacchaeus ran out to see Jesus. But remember, hated by the crowd, he was unable to get close to Jesus. So he did the next best thing. He ran ahead of the crowd and climbed a sycamore tree. Up a tree, Zacchaeus was safe from the crowd and had a clear view of Jesus who was going to pass that way. Yet his actions were considered by first century standards to be undignified and an embarrassment for any adult male to act that way. You can almost imagine the crowd snickering at the sight of Zacchaeus, the scoundrel, running and climbing a tree like some child as they waited for Jesus to pass. And as Jesus began to pass the tree, Jesus saw Zacchaeus there, out on a limb, in more ways than one. Zacchaeus had taken a risk that harmed his already tarnished image by going up the tree. He was out on a limb, possibly risking his life and hoping that the limb would support his weight. And he was out on a limb where a lot of people find themselves when they're on the margins of society, vulnerable and seeking safe refuge, even if they put themselves in their own predicament. Zacchaeus was out on a limb, and it's intriguing the contrast of him and Jesus as they met at the sycamore tree. Whereas Zacchaeus appears to be a self-centered and greedy man, Jesus was warm, giving, and a gentle person who cared deeply about the people who hung out on a limb and clung to society's edges. Addressing Zacchaeus, Jesus invited himself to the tax collector's home and in effect committed two socially unacceptable taboos. The first taboo was that Jesus proved the rumors true about his consorting with sinners, and even the worst type of sinner, tax collectors, agents who worked for the Roman Empire and traitors to their own people. Indeed, Luke states that when the crowd heard that Jesus was going to Zacchaeus' house, they began to grumble. The second taboo was that it was a social faux pas to invite oneself to someone else's house. One just doesn't do that. It wasn't something that would have been appreciated in the first century Palestine. It certainly wouldn't be appreciated in today's culture. For example, when I was younger, I had a friend stop by our home unexpectedly once. And though my mom allowed us to play outside, her plan was that when it was time for dinner, my friend would go home. However, my friend had other plans and invited himself to sit at the dinner table, our dinner table. It was unusual and it was inappropriate. And my mom had to say, don't you have dinner elsewhere? Likewise with Jesus. When he called out and invited himself to Zacchaeus' home as Zacchaeus' house guest, it was unusual and it was unexpected. And imagine Zacchaeus' point of view. He went looking for Jesus to see what kind of person Jesus was, and then suddenly found himself hosting Jesus in his home at Jesus' invitation. It's kind of humorous, turns the tables, and it reveals the type of person Jesus was. When Jesus found Zacchaeus out on a limb, he invited himself into Zacchaeus' life. It's an example that Jesus wants us to follow too. When we find persons on the margins of life or out on a limb, it's our mission to invite ourselves into their situation. It is our mission as Jesus' disciples to go out into the world and seek those who are hurting or broken and bruised. It is our mission to seek those who are lost and those who are rejected, whether it's because of their life choices, mistakes, or just happen chance. Life throws us interesting curveballs even when we're doing the right things. And as Jesus followers, we are encouraged to go out and invite ourselves into the lives of others to show them hospitality, providing them with an ear to listen to their story, arms to carry them through danger, and hearts to surround them with love, not judgment. This is important to note about Jesus because when he invited himself into Zacchaeus' life, he didn't make Zacchaeus change his lifestyle or even quit his job. Jesus also didn't require Zacchaeus to throw a fancy party, and Jesus didn't make much fanfare of the event. Instead, Jesus kept it simple, and he focused his attention on Zacchaeus as a person. Led by Jesus' example, we're encouraged to get involved in the lives of persons withholding judgment and by not making impossible demands on people, nor creating much fanfare about our involvement in the lives of the vulnerable. Instead, we open our lives and our hearts to strangers without seeking anything in return. Strangers outside the church are looking for congregations who are not afraid to get involved in their lives. This is according to author Frank Powell, who says they want persons to surround them with care. He adds that outsiders are also looking for congregations who are willing to set aside statements like, "We've always done it like this." Instead, they want to find congregations who are willing to adapt to the changes around them and respond to those needs. They want to see how the church responds to the lost in the world, both locally and globally. They're gauging how a church responds to the poor, the homeless, the needy, and widowed. And they want to see church programs that extend beyond the walls, that care for strangers. According to Frank's research and his own personal experience, he claims that though many in our culture value transparency and authenticity, the one thing that will turn people away from church is if they find a holier-than-thou-art attitude. And regarding authenticity, they want to know that members of the church are human, and they have their fallibilities, and yet are willing to speak openly of their shortcomings and how they rely on God and turn their lives around. Outsiders also want to see how we engage God in our lives, how well we do to follow God and mirror Jesus' actions with our acts of generosity and words that speak lovingly of care we provide to others, not bemoaning the type of care that was required or that we ended up giving. Finally, Frank iterates the importance of community, saying outsiders want to know they can be welcomed into the community, and more importantly, will contact them even if they leave. They may not want to visit, but they'll want a card or something on Facebook that says, "You are missed." And more importantly, he says, pose these questions to them. How can we help you? And what would help you? And then, he says, be willing to follow through. This is how people know they are valued, and they want value. They want to know there's a community of care available to them. Not only a community of care, a community that won't force ideas or force our type of care upon them. Examining the story of Zacchaeus, Jesus didn't name the type of care Zacchaeus needed. Jesus just gave an invitation that he would come to his house. And then it was up to Zacchaeus to accept the care that Jesus offered. And when he accepted Jesus' care, he was offered permission to join the community. I suspect this holds true for many church attendees as well. There is a desire to know that we belong to the community, and we want to know our relationships with each other count for more than just a handshake on a Sunday morning. There is a desire to know they belong to the community, and the community cares about their well-being, which is the care Jesus displayed to Zacchaeus. Jesus invited himself over, which is a wild idea, and then he showed Zacchaeus how much he was loved. The result of Jesus' care was that Zacchaeus gave his life to Christ and went out to make amends with those whom he wronged. Luke doesn't say he gave up his profession, but claims that he sought healing and reconciliation among his neighbors, and perhaps even went out to help those who were like him, out on a limb. Restoring persons and offering wholeness, he emulated Jesus, who came looking for people who were out on a limb. Jesus came looking for people like us. After all, some of us have been out on a limb at one time or another, and maybe we're out on a limb right now. Some of us are seeking help, seeking generosity, and seeking a community of care. Thankfully, Jesus has arrived. through us and through our community of faith. And he invites us down from the limb and offers us a new life of care so that we live lives that reflect the kind of healing and wholeness his kingdom brings. All we have to do is accept his invitation and open ourselves to his guidance so we can help each other, and at the same time be willing to receive help and to receive persons into our lives. The question becomes for us, who do you know that's out on a limb right now? Is it yourself? Is it the single mom in your neighborhood or our church who is trying to balance life and work and daycare? Is it the elderly person who's behind you or living beside you, who's alone and needs a friend and an open heart? Maybe it's the person at work who's struggling with some type of addiction. There are a lot of people out on a limb, waiting for an invitation to come down or even to be caught so they won't hit the ground. Will you be the one who initiates that invitation and invites them to receive the benefit of care from you in this community of faith? Will you be the first to approach those in need? And are you willing to be the hands and feet of Jesus who follows his lead to invite someone down off the limb and receive care?